From here on in, I think every one of these events should be starting with a really high impact yes riff song, something really, really energetic to get us going, because we sometimes forget when we get awful worked up in campaigning, we're talking about organising and budget and logistics and microphones and so on, but there is nothing better than music for gelling around. And look at all the successful political campaigns. Whoever it is comes on stage, it's already been preset, but it really makes a difference in terms of your energy. And I would go as far as to advocate, if we're going to do this seriously, why don't we create a competition for a young music student and give them a tiny award, but more importantly, recognition for writing a song for the Yes campaign for Edinburgh and Lothians? Why don't we do that? Right, okay, fantastic day. I'm so impressed to see the agenda and all the things that you can bring. And when I was talking to Lindsay at the beginning, he said, did I want to help facilitate one of the tables? And I said, well, thank you, obviously, very much for asking, but no, of course I don't. Why on earth don't I? Fundamentally, this day and all of the activity is about you, about your ideas, and it's something I feel so strongly about, that we are active in this. We are not passive. So thank you, Lindsay, but absolutely not, because I'd be really concerned then that people would say, what do you think, Michelle? You've done this. And guess what, guys? It doesn't matter a jot what I think. It's what you think. Never, never has the need for independence been more acute than now. The fundamental assault on our democracy and on our very way of life cannot continue. It's an assault on our Scottish brands, the assault on our Scottish legal system. Look at the very successful case that Joanna Cherry brought, and after the Inner Court ruled in Scotland, the comments that were being received. But self-determination is a phrase I often prefer to use rather than independence, because self-determination not only describes a direction of travel for Scotland, it describes how we ourselves behave. We make the choices. We have the power. We have the control. So it's time for us to demand change. It's absolutely about what happens on the ground. We don't need to ask for permission to be ambitious. We don't need to ask for permission to be audacious and drive things forward. And if there's one thing you take from today, is taking control and ownership. It's fundamental. So, what to do? I was going to comment a little bit about the Yes Movement of 2014, which I was heavily involved in. And I thought of some words that I'd use to describe it. It was chaotic. It was disparate. Entirely different events were running at the same time, the length and breadth of Scotland. Different styles, and sometimes different local messaging, whether it was Skye, whether it was Saltcoats. But it was fun. It was optimistic. It was hopeful. It was outward-looking and it was forward-looking. It was change-focused, and it had, ironically enough, momentous change at its heart. And of course, it did change things. It normalised independence. Walk into pubs and start to discuss it. So in terms of a change agenda, I think that is a success, even although the ultimate campaign wasn't. So let's start from where we are now, keep that optimism, keep that vibrancy and energy and determination, and move forward from there. And critically, let's keep that passion. So we have to listen. We know we have to listen to a lot of different voices. And it's so important that those voices that haven't yet been heard are given their opportunity. Younger voices, critical, because it's their tomorrow. Shy voices, and we often see that with women in particular. And there are radically different views of what an independent Scotland can look like, and we should make no apology for that. We need people on the far left. Whisper it, we need people on the right as well. We need Michael Fry writing in the National about his vision. You don't need to agree with it all, but we need it because it needs to be all-encompassing. It needs to be diverse. We need people from across the yes spectrum as well. And of course, we need all the pro-indie political parties. Diversity, inclusion must be one of our strengths. And so bear that in mind today when you facilitate your sessions. So thinking then about the pro-independence parties, the Greens are still relatively small and they've got really, really stretched resources. Their core beliefs span a huge area. When we talk about climate change and the challenges within that of building sustainability as well as a wish for independence, I mean, that is a huge brief. The SSB at the moment can struggle to make its voice heard, but we need them. The SNP, we know it's huge. It's organised, disciplined, it's quite closed, very political, it's power-focused and can be secretive. It's this way because maybe arguably it has to be this way. The fundamental premise of a political party is it needs to get power and then retain that power. So we need to recognise almost the healthy tension between a yes movement and the political parties. We need to recognise the status quo as it is. They're almost contradictory. They can sometimes feel opposing, but let's recognise it's there. One more point about the outside looking in. We were chatting earlier about, Michelle, what else are you up to apart from politics? And I was reminded of one of these so-called competence-based interviews where they ask you about, tell me about a time where you did something different. And I have to say I struggled, because is there anything else apart from politics? But of course, that's not a normal, and maybe arguably it's not a healthy attitude. For the people on the outside looking into us, although I've made this comment about the yes movement and political parties, for them, it's all the same. They don't see anything different. They just see sometimes rabble. They sometimes see things they disagree with. So critically today, the sessions have to be a lot about how we reach people, how we use our local voices. And myself and Roger Mullen, who I'm now working with, have been out talking at a lot of yes groups. And what I hear people saying is, sometimes sidling up to me, but what can I do? You know, what can I do? I'm only this person, and we all feel like that. And I've always said, focus on what you know about. And I asked this lady, I said, what is it you do? And she said, well, I work in the drinks industry. And I said, all right, tell me more about that. And she said, well, you know, it's huge and it contributes so much to the Scottish economy. And there's all these different brands and they're premium brands. That means they're sold around the world. And of course, the VAT on the tax take goes down to London and we don't get the benefit of it. And suddenly by doing that, she became increasingly energetic and passionate because that was something she knew about. So I think for all of us, focusing on what we know about and not removing our legitimacy. Nobody is required to be an expert in anything, but focus on what you do know. And many of you in here who I know have considerable expertise, and you can bring that to the table. We've got a massive responsibility. We know that about what we could be doing. It's really, really considerable. So what needs to happen to bring these sides that I talked about earlier together? Trust. There is nothing more fundamental than trust in any transaction, in any relationship. And that is the single most important thing that must be built. And the recognition, in my opinion, that the independence parties need the yes movement. And the yes movement needs the political parties. A recognition of legitimacy will go a long way in both sides. Dialogue. of course, the dialogue is absolutely vital. Trusted, private dialogue, if that's what it needs to be, but it needs to happen. I was going to mention briefly about some of the areas where things might need to be done, particularly in logistics. And I know some people in the room have quite a bit of experience about this, which is fantastic. And when I started to think about, well, if I was going to set up, in effect, a project to do all this, what would all the different elements be? And they're absolutely considerable. And I think the other thing to reflect in is, for some of you in here, this could end up virtually taking over your lives and becoming a full-time job. When you think about funding, now obviously I can see today you've got funding for today, but you're going to need more funding going forward. And it may well be, being brutally honest, that some of you end up paying for the privilege of driving your country forward. That's okay. Welcome to my world. But it's good. It's good, you know, and so for those of you who do have means, please do contribute, because your campaign is going to need budget, not just for this, but on an ongoing basis. You may at the today start to talk about some of your objectives and how you're going to collaborate together and get common cause out of that. You may start to think about your messaging and the particular messaging for Edinburgh and Lothians, which I think has been correctly identified as really very important, given the nature and the deeply held, let's face it, conservatism with a small c in Edinburgh. So much to be done. I'm just thinking there are more things down here. You might want to come up with a plan. Data storage about where you capture all this, that's going to be important as well. Stakeholder management. One thing I would do is, there are conventional approaches to this kind of thing, but increasingly I think the unconventional can work equally well. And I often argued that that was the case why the 2014 Yes campaign in many aspects was a success. Because when it was set up originally, people were put in positions, and what was happening was that Yes groups were saying, well, can we have some output, please? In other words, tell us what we need to be doing. And it went on for a while, and then people were like, actually, they were so kind of vitalised, I'm fed up waiting. We're just going to go and do our own thing. And of course, what that meant was that suddenly you had this huge blossoming of creative material and things all happening very differently. And I think the legitimacy of that local voice and people playing their part is absolutely vital. So ironically, I don't have a problem with that, and I wouldn't be too concerned about everything needs to be coordinated in a pincer movement. I think you need change agents. I call it my in and aboutery strategy. You need people who, frankly, all of the time are looking and reflecting and picking up data and intel and feeding it back. And of course, critically, behind the scenes, you need the organisers as well. So, to summarise, never has there been a more important time than just now. It's difficult, in my opinion, to exaggerate the risks that we're facing going forward. I genuinely feel extremely nervous. There was a point last week where somebody was saying, well, they could change the Constitution, and I know that's something that John Drummond's written about in the National. They could. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. So the fact that all of you are here today giving up your time on a Sunday is fantastic. This is a noble cause, and I have frequently said, since I got fully involved, using my skills, knowledge, drive, that's what I'm going to do. In effect, that's become my life's purpose. And I think for many of you, and it's great and heartening to see your faces, it's exactly the same. We have much to disagree on, but more fundamentally, that which we agree, our need for self-determination, not just in its conventional definition of independence, but our need for self-definition, taking control and ownership and driving the kind of Scotland we want to see today and we want to see for our children tomorrow. The time is now.